I'm Elaine Reynolds, 58 years old, and I've spent my entire life putting my daughter Quinlan first. As a single mother, I worked 3 jobs, skipped meals, and wore the same clothes for years so she could have opportunities I never did. I never imagined my only child would throw me out like yesterday's trash over money she didn't earn, or that just days later she'd be on my doorstep, tears streaming down her face, begging for the help she'd so cruelly denied me. Before I tell you how my daughter went from millionaire to desperate in just 1 week, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had someone you love choose money over loyalty. Growing up in Oak Ridge, a small Midwestern town with more churches than traffic lights, I learned early that nothing in life comes easy. My parents were hardworking people who taught me the value of a dollar and the importance of self-reliance. Those lessons served me well when I found myself pregnant at 24 with no husband in sight. Richard Blackwood swept into my life like a summer storm, intense, exciting, and gone before I could catch my breath. When I told him about the pregnancy, he made it clear he wanted no part of fatherhood. No child support, no visits, nothing. Just a check to take care of it, and a request to never contact him again. I tore up that check and decided then and there that my baby and I would make it on our own. I didn't pursue child support. I didn't want drama or complications. I just wanted to give my child a stable, loving home, even if it was just the 2 of us. Those early years were brutal. I worked as a waitress at the local diner during the day, did bookkeeping for small businesses in the evenings, and on weekends, I cleaned houses for extra cash. Sleep became a luxury I rarely enjoyed. My apartment was in the less desirable part of town, a 1-bedroom unit with peeling wallpaper and temperamental plumbing. I gave Quinlan the bedroom and made do with a pull-out couch in the living room. Vacations were non-existent. New clothes came from thrift stores or clearance racks. My own education dreams were postponed indefinitely. Every spare penny went toward giving Quinlan the things she needed: good food, decent clothes, school supplies, and the occasional treat to make sure she never felt deprived. Despite our financial struggles, Quinlan was a bright, curious child. She devoured books faster than I could supply them from the public library. Her teachers frequently told me she was gifted with a quick mind and natural leadership abilities. I swelled with pride at every parent-teacher conference knowing that despite our challenges, my daughter was thriving. We developed special rituals that didn't cost money but built our bond. Sunday morning pancakes shaped like animals. Stargazing from our tiny balcony with hot chocolate in hand. Bike rides along the river when the weather permitted. I tried my hardest to shield her from the worst of our hardships. When the electricity was about to be cut off, I told her we were having an adventure with flashlights and candles. When I couldn't afford new shoes for myself, I explained I was breaking in my old ones because they were so comfortable. "Mom, why don't I have a dad like other kids?" Quinlan asked me once when she was 7. I carefully explained that some families had 2 parents, some had 1, and all that mattered was the love within the family. I never spoke ill of Richard, simply saying he wasn't ready to be a father. I promised myself I would tell her more when she was older, but as time passed, it seemed less and less relevant to our lives. I made a solemn promise to myself that Quinlan would have opportunities I never had. She would go to college. She would never know the bone-deep exhaustion of working multiple jobs just to survive. She would have choices in life that financial insecurity had stolen from me. Little did I know that the promise I made with such love would eventually lead to the greatest heartbreak of my life. As Quinlan grew into her teenage years, her academic achievements continued to impress everyone around her. She maintained straight A's while participating in debate club student council and volunteering at the local animal shelter. Her dedication earned her a full scholarship to Westlake University, a prestigious school that neither of us had dared dream she might attend. The day her acceptance letter arrived, we both cried tears of joy. I splurged on a cake from the fancy bakery downtown, something I'd never done before, and we celebrated as if she'd won the lottery. In many ways, that scholarship was our lottery ticket, a chance for Quinlan to step into a world I could never provide for her. "You did it, honey," I told her, clutching her hands across our tiny kitchen table. "You've worked so hard, and now the world is opening up for you." "We did it, Mom," she corrected me, her eyes shining. "I wouldn't be here without you." Those words warmed my heart and sustained me through the difficult transition that followed. Dropping her off at college was one of the hardest days of my life, not just because I would miss her terribly, but because I could sense that our relationship was about to change fundamentally. Quinlan called me every Sunday during her first semester, eager to share stories about her classes, her roommate, and the campus activities she was enjoying. But gradually, those calls became shorter and less frequent. When she came home for winter break, I noticed subtle changes. She spoke differently, using words and references I didn't understand. She complained about the size of our apartment, the quality of our furniture, even the brands of food in our kitchen. "Mom, how can you still use that ancient flip phone?" she asked with evident embarrassment when her new friends from college came to visit. "Everyone's parents have smartphones now." I smiled and explained that my phone worked just fine for what I needed, but inside, a small hurt bloomed. It was the first time Quinlan had ever made me feel inadequate. During her sophomore year, Quinlan met Jackson Harrington, the son of a banking executive. Handsome, polished, and dripping with confidence, Jackson came from the kind of wealth I couldn't comprehend. Their relationship progressed quickly, and soon Quinlan was spending holidays with his family in their vacation homes rather than returning to our apartment. "You should see their house in Aspen, Mom," she gushed during one of our increasingly rare phone conversations. "It has an indoor pool and a view of the mountains that will take your breath away." "That sounds wonderful, sweetie," I replied, looking around at my faded wallpaper and secondhand furniture. "I'm glad you're having such amazing experiences." By her junior year, Quinlan had fully assimilated into Jackson's world of privilege. Her new circle of friends were all from similar backgrounds, children of executives, politicians, and old money families. When she did visit home, she seemed uncomfortable, as if our modest life was a poorly fitting coat she couldn't wait to remove. "Have you ever thought about updating this place?" she asked during one visit, wrinkling her nose at the living room, where I'd spent countless nights sleeping on the pull-out couch so she could have the bedroom. A fresh coat of paint would do wonders. I swallowed my hurt and reminded myself that this was what I had wanted, for Quinlan to have opportunities beyond what I had known. If those opportunities were changing her, perhaps that was simply the price of her advancement in the world. After graduation, Quinlan landed an impressive job at Lux Marketing, a firm that handled campaigns for high-end fashion and lifestyle brands. Her starting salary was more than I had ever made in my best year. She moved into a sleek apartment in the city with a roommate from her sorority and began building a life that seemed increasingly distant from our humble beginnings. Our relationship grew more strained, though I made excuses for her behavior. She was busy establishing her career. She was adjusting to adult life. She would eventually find her balance and remember the values I had taught her. Meanwhile, I continued my multiple jobs, finally allowing myself to think about retirement. I had managed to save a modest amount over the years, and I dreamed of perhaps opening a small bookstore cafe. Nothing fancy, just a cozy place where people could gather, read, and enjoy simple pleasures. It seemed like a distant dream, but for the first time in decades, I permitted myself to want something just for me. I had no idea that fate was about to deal us both a hand that would change everything. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in April, its heavy cream envelope bearing the letterhead of Whitman Frost & Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in the country. My first thought was that it must be a mistake. Why would such an important firm be contacting me? With trembling fingers, I opened it and began to read. Dear Ms. Reynolds, we are writing to inform you of the recent passing of Mr. Richard Blackwood. Richard was dead. A heart attack at 54. The shock of this news was quickly overshadowed by what followed. Through our investigation of Mr. Blackwood's affairs, we have become aware of the existence of his daughter, Quinlan Reynolds. As representatives of the Blackwood family estate, we request a meeting with you and Ms. Reynolds at your earliest convenience. I sat down hard on my sofa, the letter clutched in my hand. Richard Blackwood, the man who had wanted nothing to do with his daughter, was apparently not the nobody I'd assumed him to be. The letter's formal tone and the reputation of the law firm suggested money, significant money. When I called Quinlan to tell her, her initial reaction was disbelief. My father, the one who abandoned us before I was born? Why would his family want to meet me now? I don't know, honey, I said honestly, but I think we should find out. We agreed to meet with the lawyers the following week. I took a rare day off work and wore my best outfit, a navy blue pantsuit I'd bought on clearance for job interviews years ago. Quinlan met me outside the imposing glass and steel office building in the financial district, looking polished and confident in her professional attire. You look beautiful, I told her suddenly, conscious of my dated clothes and sensible shoes. Thanks, Mom, she replied, giving me a quick hug before straightening her shoulders. Let's find out what this is all about. The conference room was intimidating, all mahogany and leather with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Two attorneys in impeccable suits introduced themselves as Marcus Whitman and Sarah Frost. They invited us to sit and offered refreshments, which we both declined. Thank you for coming, Mr. Whitman began. As our letter indicated, we represent the estate of Richard Blackwood. What you may not know is that Richard was the only son of Harold and Margaret Blackwood. The name meant nothing to me, but Quinlan gasped softly. The Blackwood Financial Group, she asked, her voice tight with surprise. Mr. Whitman nodded. Precisely. The Blackwoods are one of the wealthiest families in the country with holdings in real estate technology and international finance. And they never knew about me, Quinlan asked, her voice small. Richard never told his parents about his relationship with your mother, or your existence, Ms. Frost explained gently. It was only after his death, when we began settling his affairs, that we discovered documentation regarding your birth. Documentation? I echoed, confused. Richard kept a copy of Quinlan's birth certificate in his personal files, Ms. Frost clarified, along with several news articles about her academic achievements and a photograph that appears to have been taken at her college graduation. This revelation stunned me. Richard had tracked our daughter's life from afar, collecting evidence of her existence while never acknowledging her. Harold and Margaret Blackwood were understandably shocked to learn they had a granddaughter, Mr. Whitman continued. They have requested a DNA test to confirm the relationship, but assuming the results verify what we already believe to be true, Quinlan stands to inherit a substantial portion of the Blackwood family fortune. How substantial? Quinlan asked, her business instincts kicking in. Approximately $40 million, Mr. Whitman stated matter-of-factly. The room seemed to tilt. $40 million. More money than I could comprehend. More money than Quinlan and I together could spend in several lifetimes. There's no catch, Ms. Frost added as if reading my thoughts. The Blackwoods simply wish to acknowledge their granddaughter and ensure she receives what they believe she is entitled to as Richard's only child. The DNA test was arranged for the following day. Within a week, the results confirmed what we already knew. Quinlan was indeed Richard Blackwood's daughter. True to their word, the Blackwood family moved quickly to welcome Quinlan into the fold and transfer the promised inheritance. As I watched my daughter absorb the reality of her newfound wealth, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Joy for the opportunities this would bring her. Pride that she was being recognized as her father's daughter. But also anxiety about how this sudden windfall might change her, change us. Quinlan's transformation began immediately. Within days of receiving the first portion of her inheritance, she leased a luxury apartment in the most exclusive building in the city. Her modest wardrobe was replaced with designer labels. Her reliable sedan was traded for a sports car that cost more than I had earned in the past 5 years. "Mom, you have to come see my new place," she insisted over the phone, her voice vibrating with excitement. "It has a doorman and a rooftop pool and the most amazing view of the city." "That sounds wonderful, honey," I replied, genuine happiness in my voice despite my lingering concerns. "I'm so proud of you." What I didn't say was that I was already sensing a growing distance between us. Quinlan's text messages and calls had become focused almost exclusively on her new purchases, her meetings with financial advisors, and her interactions with the Blackwood family, who had apparently decided to embrace their newly discovered granddaughter with open arms. 2 weeks after the inheritance news, Jackson proposed. The timing wasn't lost on me, but I kept my reservations to myself when Quinlan called to share the news, her voice breathless with happiness. "He says we can have the wedding at his parents' estate," she gushed. "And for the honeymoon, we're thinking of chartering a yacht in the Mediterranean." "That sounds lovely," I said, trying to match her enthusiasm. "I'm happy for you, Quinlan." "Everything's happening so fast, Mom," she said. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life now." Neither could I, and as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the daughter I had raised was slipping away from me, replaced by someone I barely recognized. Someone whose values and priorities seemed increasingly foreign to the humble principles I had tried to instill in her. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. Quinlan's housewarming party was scheduled for a Saturday evening in May, 6 weeks after the inheritance news had turned our lives upside down. I spent hours getting ready, wanting to look my best for this glimpse into my daughter's new world. I wore a dress I'd bought specially for the occasion. Not designer, but the nicest thing I'd ever owned, and even splurged on having my hair professionally styled. The building was as impressive as Quinlan had described. All gleaming glass and polished marble, with uniformed staff who eyed me with barely concealed assessment as I approached the front desk. "I'm Elaine Reynolds," I told the concierge. "I'm here for Quinlan Reynolds' party." He checked his list with theatrical slowness before finally nodding. "Penthouse level. The private elevator is to your right." The elevator ride gave me a moment to collect myself to prepare for the evening ahead. I was nervous about meeting Quinlan's wealthy new friends, but excited to share in her happiness. Whatever reservations I had about the changes in her life, I was still her mother, still proud of her, still loving her, unconditionally. The elevator doors opened directly into Quinlan's apartment, and I stepped into a scene from a lifestyle magazine. The space was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city lights. Modern art adorned the walls, and sleek furniture in neutral tones created an atmosphere of understated luxury. At least 30 people mingled throughout the open-concept living area, champagne flutes in hand, their laughter and conversation creating a sophisticated hum. I scanned the room for Quinlan and finally spotted her near the windows, surrounded by a small group of elegantly dressed people. She looked stunning in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her hair and makeup flawless. Jackson stood beside her, his arm draped possessively around her waist. When she saw me, her smile faltered for just a moment before she composed herself and waved me over. "Mom, you made it," she said, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek that somehow managed to avoid actual contact. "Everyone, this is my mother, Elaine." The introductions were a blur of unfamiliar names and polite smiles that didn't reach eyes. I noticed several of them exchanging glances when Quinlan mentioned I was her mother, as if they couldn't quite believe it. "Elaine, this is Harold and Margaret Blackwood," Quinlan said, gesturing to an elegant older couple who approached us. "My grandparents." I extended my hand, feeling suddenly inadequate in my department store dress. "It's nice to meet you both." Margaret Blackwood took my hand briefly, her grip cool and formal. "Likewise, Quinlan has told us so little about her upbringing. I suppose we have you to thank for raising her on your own all these years." The words were correct, but her tone suggested she found the very idea distasteful. "It was my privilege," I replied, simply refusing to be baited. Harold Blackwood regarded me with open curiosity. "Our son never mentioned you." "No, I don't suppose he would have," I said, maintaining my composure despite the implied insult. Quinlan laughed nervously and steered me away toward the bar. "Mom, why don't you get a drink? The champagne is amazing." As the evening progressed, I became increasingly aware of being an outsider in my daughter's new life. Conversations swirled around topics I couldn't contribute to. Exclusive resorts I'd never visit, designers I'd never wear, investments I couldn't comprehend. When I tried to join a discussion about recent theater performances, a woman in an obviously expensive silk blouse cut me off mid-sentence to ask Quinlan about her renovation plans. I retreated to a quiet corner with my champagne, observing the party from a distance. Quinlan barely glanced my way, completely absorbed in her new social circle. Occasionally, I caught people looking at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to pity, to barely disguised disdain. After an hour of this treatment, I decided to find Quinlan and make my excuses to leave. I spotted her in conversation with Jackson and the Blackwoods near the kitchen island. As I approached, I overheard Margaret Blackwood speaking in a low, urgent voice. "Darling, you must be careful. Women like that always have an angle. Now that you have the family money—" "Mom!" Quinlan interrupted, noticing my approach. Her face flushed with what I hoped was embarrassment at her grandmother's words. "I think I'm going to head out, honey," I said, pretending I hadn't heard. "It's getting late." "Already?" Quinlan's relief was palpable. "Let me walk you to the elevator." As we moved away from the group, Jackson called after us. "Don't forget, we're discussing the trust fund details tomorrow, babe." At the elevator, Quinlan pressed the button and turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Your new place is beautiful," I said, filling the awkward silence. "And it seems like you're getting along well with the Blackwoods." "They've been amazing," Quinlan replied. "They're introducing me to all the right people, helping me understand how to manage my inheritance." "That's wonderful," I said, meaning it despite my discomfort with their obvious disdain for me. "I'm happy for you, honey." Quinlan bit her lip, a gesture I recognized from her childhood when she had something difficult to say. "Mom, about your apartment." "What about it?" I asked, confused by the sudden change of subject. "I've been thinking, now that I have all this money, I want to help you. I know you've worked so hard all these years." My heart warmed. Despite the uncomfortable evening here, was my Quinlan still thoughtful, still caring? "That's sweet of you, honey, but I'm doing fine." "No, Mom, listen." She took a deep breath. "I've bought you a condo in Arizona." "Arizona?" I echoed, baffled. "But my life is here. My friends, my work. It's a really nice retirement community," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Great amenities, people your own age. And the climate would be better for your arthritis." I didn't have arthritis. "Quinlan, I'm not ready to retire, and I certainly don't want to move across the country." She frowned, her expression hardening in a way I'd never seen before. "Mom, I'm trying to do something nice for you. Why can't you just be grateful?" The elevator arrived with a soft chime, but I made no move to enter it. "Honey, I appreciate the thought, but that's a major life decision. We should discuss it properly, not in the middle of your party." Quinlan glanced back toward her guests, clearly impatient to return to them. "Fine, we'll talk tomorrow. I'll come by your place around noon." I nodded, stepping into the elevator. As the doors began to close, Quinlan added, "And Mom, maybe don't mention to anyone that you were a waitress, okay, or the bookkeeping. It doesn't really fit with the family image." The doors closed on her apologetic smile, and I rode down to the lobby in stunned silence, tears pricking at my eyes. The next day, I waited anxiously for Quinlan's visit. When noon came and went with no sign of her, I called her cell phone. No answer. I sent a text. No reply. Finally, around 3 o'clock, my doorbell rang. I opened the door to find not just Quinlan, but Jackson and a man in a suit I didn't recognize. "Mom," Quinlan said without preamble. "This is Jeffrey Palmer, my personal assistant. Can we come in?" Personal assistant? When had that happened, I stepped aside, allowing them into my modest apartment. Jackson immediately wrinkled his nose, making no attempt to hide his distaste for my home. "Quinlan, what's going on?" I asked, increasingly uneasy. She exchanged a look with Jackson, who nodded encouragingly. "Mom, we need to talk about your living situation. I told you yesterday I'm not interested in moving to Arizona." "It's not just about that," Quinlan said, her voice taking on a hard edge I'd never heard before. "The thing is, I've terminated your lease." "You've what?" I stared at her in disbelief. "I spoke to your landlord," she continued, avoiding my eyes. "I explained that I'd be moving you to better accommodations. He agreed to end your lease immediately." "You had no right to do that," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is my home." "Mom, be reasonable," Quinlan replied with obvious impatience. "This place is a dump. I'm offering you a fresh start in a beautiful condo that I own outright. No more rent to pay, no more working yourself to the bone." "That's not the point," I insisted. "You made this decision without consulting me. You're trying to ship me off to another state like I'm an inconvenience." Jackson stepped forward, his smile condescending. "Elaine, you're being emotional. Quinlan is trying to provide for you the way you provided for her. It's the circle of life." I turned back to my daughter, searching her face for any sign of the compassionate young woman I'd raised. "Quinlan, why are you doing this? What's really going on here?" She squared her shoulders, lifting her chin in a gesture reminiscent of Margaret Blackwood. "The Blackwoods think it would be best if there was some distance between us for a while. They're concerned about your influence as I take my place in the family." The words hit me like physical blows. "My influence? I'm your mother." "Yes, and you did your best," she said, her voice softening with what sounded like rehearsed pity. "But let's be honest, Mom. You kept me from my father's family all these years. You kept me from the life I was entitled to." "Is that what they told you?" I asked, incredulous. "Quinlan, your father wanted nothing to do with you. He gave me money for an abortion and asked me never to contact him again. I didn't keep you from anyone. I protected you from rejection." "That's your version," she replied coldly. "The Blackwoods say Richard regretted his decision, that he wanted to reach out but was afraid I'd hate him. They say you probably hid attempts he made to contact me." "That's absolutely untrue," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "I would never have kept your father from you if he'd wanted a relationship." "How would I know?" Quinlan demanded. "Maybe you were just afraid of losing the child support." "What child support?" I cried. "I never received a penny from Richard or the Blackwoods. I worked 3 jobs to support us." Jackson placed a hand on Quinlan's shoulder. "Let's not get sidetracked. Jeffrey has already packed your essential items, Elaine. The rest will be placed in storage until you decide what you want to do with them." For the first time, I noticed several boxes stacked by my bedroom door. They had been in my home, touching my things, making decisions about my life without my knowledge or consent. "Get out," I said quietly. "Mom, don't be difficult," Quinlan sighed. "We have a flight booked for you tomorrow morning. Jeffrey will drive you to the airport." "I said get out," I repeated, my voice rising. "All of you, now." "Mom." "No." I cut her off, years of maternal authority surfacing through my shock and hurt. "You don't get to do this, Quinlan. You don't get to erase 28 years of love and sacrifice because your wealthy new family finds me embarrassing. If you want me out of your life, fine, but you don't get to decide where I live or how I live." Jackson stepped forward, his expression darkening. "Be reasonable. Quinlan is offering you a comfortable retirement. Most people would be grateful." "I'm not most people," I replied. "I'm her mother, and I deserve basic respect, which is clearly something you and the Blackwoods know nothing about." Quinlan's face flushed with anger. "This is exactly why the Blackwoods think we need distance. You're refusing to adapt to the new reality. You're stuck in the past, Mom, and you're trying to keep me there with you." "The past?" I echoed in disbelief. "You mean the years I spent raising you alone, working myself to exhaustion so you could have opportunities, loving you unconditionally? If that's the past you think I'm stuck in, then yes, I plead guilty." "We're done here," Quinlan said abruptly, turning toward the door. "The lease termination is effective immediately. You have until the end of the week to vacate. After that, the management company has authorization to remove any remaining belongings." "Quinlan, please," I said, my voice breaking as the full reality of what was happening crashed down on me. "Don't do this. Don't throw away our relationship over money." She paused at the door, and for a brief moment, I saw hesitation in her eyes. Then Jackson whispered something in her ear, and her expression hardened again. "Goodbye, Mom," she said flatly. "Jeffrey will be in touch about your flight details." And just like that, they were gone, leaving me standing alone in the apartment that would no longer be my home, surrounded by boxes containing the remnants of the life I had built. The life that apparently wasn't good enough for my daughter anymore. As the door closed behind them, I sank to my knees on the worn carpet and did something I had never allowed myself to do in all the hard years of raising Quinlan alone. I broke down and wept. The days following Quinlan's betrayal passed in a blur of grief and practical necessities. Despite her threats about the lease termination, I discovered she had no legal right to end my agreement with the landlord. Nevertheless, I couldn't bear to stay in an apartment where I no longer felt secure. Using my modest savings, I found a small rental on the other side of town and began the process of moving. Friends I hadn't leaned on in years stepped forward to help. Former coworkers, neighbors, even the owner of the diner where I'd waitressed for so long. Their kindness was a balm to my wounded heart, but nothing could fully ease the pain of being discarded by my only child. "She'll come around," my friend Judy assured me as she helped pack my kitchen items. "Once the novelty of all that money wears off, she'll remember who was there for her all along." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The truth was, I wasn't sure I would welcome Quinlan back with open arms, even if she did have a change of heart. The things she had said, the accusations she had made, had cut too deeply. My new apartment was half the size of my previous one, located above a laundromat in an aging building with no elevator. The rent was within my budget, but just barely. At 58, I found myself starting over with little more than the basics and a shattered sense of purpose. One evening, about a week after the move, I hit rock bottom. Sitting alone on a second-hand sofa in my new living room, surrounded by unpacked boxes, I confronted the question that had been haunting me. Who was I now that I was no longer primarily Quinlan's mother? For decades, every decision I made had been filtered through the lens of motherhood. What would be best for Quinlan? How could I provide for her? What sacrifices were necessary to secure her future, with her gone? And worse, with her having rejected everything I had tried to be for her. I felt hollowed out, purposeless. A knock at my door roused me from these dark thoughts. I opened it to find an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes standing in the hallway. "Hello there," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Marta Diaz from apartment 3B. I noticed you moving in last week and thought I'd stop by to welcome you to the building." In her hands was a ceramic dish covered with foil. "I made too much pastelito for dinner. Thought you might enjoy some." The simple gesture of neighborly kindness broke through the wall I'd built around my emotions. To my embarrassment, tears sprang to my eyes. "I'm sorry," I said, wiping them away hastily. "It's been a difficult time. Please come in." Oversharing that homemade pastry at my small kitchen table, I found myself telling Marta my story. She listened without interruption, her weathered face reflecting compassion rather than pity. "My dear," she said when I finished, "what your daughter did was cruel. But you are more than her mother. You were a whole person before she came into your life, and you are a whole person now." "I don't know who that person is anymore," I admitted. Marta reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Then this is your opportunity to find out, to rediscover the Elaine who exists beyond motherhood." Her words struck a chord in me. For years, I'd put my own dreams and identity on hold to focus on Quinlan. Perhaps now was the time to reclaim them. The next morning, I woke with a new resolve. I updated my resume and began applying for jobs despite knowing my age might be a barrier. I reached out to my network of former employers and colleagues. I even enrolled in a free computer skills workshop at the local library to improve my employability. To my surprise, the owner of the bookstore where I'd been a regular customer for years offered me a part-time position. The pay was modest, but the work environment was pleasant, and being surrounded by books brought me a peace I desperately needed. As weeks passed, I gradually established a new routine. Work at the bookstore, coffee with Marta on Wednesday mornings, volunteer shifts at the community garden on weekends, small pleasures that helped stitch together the torn fabric of my life. One evening, while helping a customer find a book on small business management, I was reminded of my long-deferred dream of opening a bookstore cafe. On impulse, I checked out several books on the subject before leaving work that day. "A bookstore cafe," Marta said when I mentioned it during our next coffee meeting. "That sounds wonderful, Elaine. You certainly have the experience for it." "It's just a fantasy," I demurred. "I don't have the capital for something like that." "Start small," she advised. "My nephew Miguel is a business advisor at the community college. Why don't you talk to him? The consultation is free." I expected Miguel to gently discourage me to point out all the practical barriers to a woman my age starting a business with limited resources. Instead, he listened to my vision with genuine interest and helped me draft a preliminary business plan. "You know books, you understand customer service, and you have a clear concept," he said. "Yes, financing will be challenging, but not impossible. There are small business loans for women entrepreneurs, crowdfunding options, and potential partners to consider." For the first time since Quinlan's betrayal, I felt a flicker of excitement about the future. Not just a future I was enduring, but one I was actively creating. I began researching available commercial spaces in affordable neighborhoods, calculating startup costs, and sketching layouts for my dream shop. Each small step forward helped heal the wound Quinlan had left in my heart. I wasn't just surviving her rejection, I was building something new from its ashes. During this period of cautious rebirth, I had no contact with Quinlan. I saw her face occasionally on social media, at charity galas with the Blackwoods vacationing on private islands, with Jackson shopping at exclusive boutiques. She looked happy, glamorous, completely at home in her new world of privilege. I tried not to dwell on these glimpses of her life without me. Instead, I focused on nurturing the tender shoots of my own renewal. The pain didn't disappear, but it gradually became more manageable, less all-consuming. Then, exactly 6 weeks after Quinlan had walked out of my life, everything changed again. The news broke on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was arranging a new display of mystery novels at the bookstore when my coworker gasped at something on her phone. Elaine, isn't your daughter's last name Blackwood now? After her father's family? My hands froze on the book I was shelving. Yes. Why? She turned her phone screen toward me, showing a news headline: Blackwood Financial Group under federal investigation for fraud and money laundering. My heart hammered in my chest as I quickly scanned the article. The Blackwood family's financial empire was being investigated for years of systematic tax fraud, money laundering through offshore accounts, and various securities violations. The family's assets had been frozen pending the investigation, and criminal charges were expected. Oh my God, I whispered, thinking of Quinlan. Whatever the Blackwoods had done, she was innocent. But her inheritance, her new lifestyle, everything she had thrown away our relationship for, it was all built on that potentially criminal fortune. Throughout the day, more news trickled in. Harold and Margaret Blackwood had been taken in for questioning. The company's stock was in freefall. Former employees were coming forward with damning testimonials about the family's business practices. I tried calling Quinlan several times, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I left messages expressing my concern, assuring her that whatever happened, we could work through it together. Part of me hoped this crisis might bring her back to her senses, back to the values I had raised her with. Another part, the part still raw from her rejection, wondered if I was being a fool for caring. 3 days passed with no word from Quinlan. The news about the Blackwoods grew increasingly grim. Evidence suggested the fraud had been going on for decades, with family members fully aware of the illegal activities. The $40 million Quinlan had inherited was among the assets frozen by federal authorities. On Friday evening, I returned home from work to find a figure huddled on the floor beside my apartment door. It took me a moment to recognize Quinlan. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup. Her hair was unwashed, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, her whole body conveying defeat. She looked up at me, her face crumpling. "Mom?" She whispered, her voice breaking on that single syllable. Despite everything, my heart constricted at the sight of my child in pain. I unlocked my door without a word and gestured for her to come inside. The apartment was small and simply furnished, a far cry from both my previous home and certainly from the luxury Quinlan had briefly enjoyed. She stood in the center of the living room, looking lost and very young suddenly. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, defaulting to the practical in the face of overwhelming emotion. She nodded mutely, and I busied myself in the kitchenette, giving us both a moment to collect ourselves. When I returned with 2 steaming mugs, Quinlan had sunk onto the sofa, her shoulders hunched as if bearing an invisible weight. "I suppose you've seen the news," she said after accepting the tea. "Yes." I sat in the armchair across from her, maintaining a physical distance that reflected the emotional gulf between us. "Are you all right?" A harsh laugh escaped her. "All right. My bank accounts are frozen. My credit cards don't work. The condo has been seized as an asset purchased with proceeds of criminal activity." Jackson broke off our engagement the minute the story broke. She paused, swallowing hard. "And the Blackwoods have made it very clear that I'm not really family." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it despite everything. "They used me, Mom," Quinlan continued, tears spilling down her cheeks. "They knew the investigation was closing in. They needed someone clean to move assets to someone with a legitimate claim to the family money. That's all I was to them, a convenient hiding place for their dirty money." I let her cry, resisting the maternal instinct to rush over and comfort her. The wound she had inflicted was still too fresh, the betrayal too profound. "Where have you been staying?" I asked when her sobs subsided. "Hotels at first," she replied, wiping her face with her sleeve. "But then my cards were declined. I've been sleeping in my car for the last 2 nights. It's the only thing I still own outright from before the inheritance." The thought of my daughter sleeping in her car sent a pang through me, but I steeled myself against instant forgiveness. "What about your friends, your colleagues from work?" "They're gone," Quinlan said bitterly. "Turns out friends who appear when you're suddenly rich disappear just as quickly when the money does. and I lost my job. The company didn't want to be associated with the scandal." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a remorse that seemed genuine. "Mom, I know I have no right to ask this after how I treated you, but I have nowhere else to go. Could I stay here, just until I figure things out?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. Part of me wanted to refuse to let her experience the full consequences of her choices. But another part, the part that had held her as a newborn and promised to always protect her, couldn't turn her away. "You can stay," I said finally. "But we need to be clear about something, Quinlan. You hurt me deeply. You didn't just reject my lifestyle or my choices. You rejected me as a person. You made me feel worthless after I gave you everything I had." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I know. I'm so sorry, Mom. I got caught up in it all. The money, the status, the Blackwoods telling me I deserved better than the life we had. I listened to people who didn't know me instead of the one person who always had my best interests at heart." "Words are easy," I replied, not unkindly but firmly. "If you stay here, there will be conditions. You'll need to get a job, any job, and contribute to household expenses. This isn't a free ride." She nodded quickly. "Of course, I'll do anything. I just need a chance to prove I can be the daughter you deserve again." I stood up emotionally exhausted. "The spare room is small, but the bed is comfortable. There are clean towels in the bathroom cabinet. We can talk more tomorrow." As I turned to go to my own room, Quinlan's voice stopped me. "Mom, thank you. I don't deserve your help, but I'm grateful for it." I nodded without turning around, not trusting myself to speak. The road to repairing our relationship would be long and uncertain. Her betrayal had changed something fundamental between us, perhaps permanently. But she was still my daughter, and somewhere beneath the person who had rejected me so callously was the child I had raised with love and sacrifice. Only time would tell if that person still existed, or if she had been lost forever to the allure of wealth and status that had so briefly been hers. The months that followed Quinlan's return were both challenging and healing. True to her word, she immediately began looking for work, swallowing her pride to apply for positions she would have considered beneath her just weeks before. After numerous rejections, partly due to the Blackwood scandal tainting her reputation, she finally secured a job as a barista at a local coffee shop. "It's not what I'm used to," she admitted after her first week, her hands raw from cleaning equipment and her feet aching from standing all day. "But it's honest work, and the tips aren't bad." I watched her adaptation to this new reality with cautious optimism. The Quinlan who had thrown me away for money and status would have considered such work beneath her dignity. This Quinlan accepted it with a humility that suggested genuine change. Our living arrangement required adjustments from both of us. The apartment was small, and we had to learn to navigate shared spaces respectfully. I maintained clear boundaries, refusing to slip back into the role of caretaker. Quinlan was an adult, and I insisted she take full responsibility for herself, cooking her own meals, doing her own laundry, managing her own schedule. "I never realized how much you did for me," she confessed one evening as she struggled to iron a shirt for work. "Even when I was grown, you were still picking up the slack in 1,000 little ways." "That's what happens when you're used to being the responsible one," I replied. "You don't even notice you're doing it anymore." Gradually, we began to have the difficult conversations we needed to heal. Late one night, over cups of herbal tea at our small kitchen table, Quinlan finally asked the question that had been hovering between us. "How can you ever forgive me, Mom, after what I did?" I considered my answer carefully. Forgiveness isn't a single moment, Quinlan. It's a process. Some days I feel it more than others. Some days, the hurt is still too fresh. I was horrible to you. She acknowledged, her voice thick with emotion. I let the Blackwoods convince me that you'd held me back, that you'd kept me from my rightful place in their world. I was so caught up in the fantasy of being an heiress that I forgot who I really was, who you raised me to be. The money changed you, I said simply. She shook her head. No, that's too easy an excuse. The money revealed me, or at least it revealed a weakness in me I didn't know was there. A willingness to trade what's truly valuable for things that only seem valuable. Her insight surprised me. Perhaps the painful fall from grace had taught her something valuable after all. As weeks turned into months, Quinlan proved her commitment to rebuilding our relationship through consistent actions rather than just words. She contributed her share of the rent without being reminded. She picked up extra shifts when expenses were tight. She never complained about the modest lifestyle that had once so embarrassed her. Meanwhile, I continued pursuing my dream of opening a bookstore cafe. Miguel, my business advisor, helped me secure a small loan through a program for women entrepreneurs. I found an affordable space in an up-and-coming neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but full of potential. Second Chapters. I decided to call it a name that reflected both the books I would sell and the new beginning I was creating for myself. When I shared my plans with Quinlan, her response surprised me. That's amazing, Mom, she said with genuine enthusiasm. You've been talking about a place like this for as long as I can remember. It's a risk, I admitted. At my age, starting over like this isn't the conventional choice. Since when have you ever made the conventional choice? Quinlan asked with a smile. You raised me alone when everyone said you couldn't. You worked multiple jobs instead of taking the easy way out. You've always been brave, Mom. This is just the next example. Her support touched me deeply. It was the first time since her return that I felt she truly saw me. Not just as her mother, but as a person with dreams and capabilities of my own. The day before the grand opening of Second Chapters, Quinlan asked if she could speak with me about something important. We sat in the newly furnished bookstore after a long day of final preparations, surrounded by carefully arranged shelves and the cozy cafe area that would soon welcome customers. I've been offered a job, she said, a marketing position with a small ethical fashion brand. The pay is decent and there's room for growth. That's wonderful news, I said, genuinely pleased for her. When do you start? That's what I wanted to talk to you about, she continued. The job is here in town, but I think it's time for me to find my own place again. I nodded, understanding her need for independence. That makes sense. It's not because I want to leave you, she hurried to add. These months living together have been healing for me. I hope for you too. But I need to stand on my own 2 feet again to prove to myself that I can build a life based on work and real relationships, not inherited wealth or status. I think that's wise, I told her. And Quinlan, I'm proud of you. I'm proud. Not because you got a good job or because you're moving out. I'm proud of how you've handled losing everything. You've shown character and resilience I wasn't sure you still possessed. Tears glistened in her eyes. That means everything to me, Mom. After what I did, I wouldn't have blamed you if you'd shut the door in my face that night. The fact that you gave me another chance, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that. Just be the person I raised you to be, I said simply. That's all I've ever wanted. The grand opening of Second Chapters the next day exceeded all my expectations. Friends, neighbors, and curious locals filled the shop browsing books and enjoying coffee and pastries in the cafe area. Marta proudly told everyone who would listen that she had been my first friend in the building. Miguel brought his family and colleagues from the business center, and Quinlan was there too, efficiently helping customers running the register when things got busy, making sure my special day went smoothly. I watched her interact with people, warmly, genuinely, without the artificial polish she had adopted during her brief time with the Blackwoods, and felt a deep sense of peace. The money had come and gone, taking with it the false friends and superficial values. What remained was real, the strength I had found in starting over the community that had supported me and the daughter who had lost her way, but found it again. As the day wound down and the last customers departed, Quinlan and I stood together at the front window of the bookstore, looking out at the street that would become my new professional home. "You did it, Mom," she said softly. "You created something wonderful completely on your own terms." "Not completely on my own," I corrected her. "I had help. From Miguel, from Marta, from you." "But the vision was yours," she insisted. "You always taught me that real wealth isn't about money or possessions. It's about creating a life of meaning and purpose. I forgot that lesson for a while, but I won't again." I put my arm around her shoulders, this daughter who had hurt me so deeply but was finding her way back to the values that truly mattered. Our relationship would never be the same as before. The betrayal had left scars that would always be part of our story. But perhaps the new relationship we were building, based on mutual respect rather than dependence, would ultimately be stronger. "You know what I've learned through all this," I said as we looked out at the fading evening light. "Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what you can't bear to live without." Quinlan nodded, leaning into my embrace. "And sometimes the richest people are the ones who have nothing to prove." We stood there together, mother and daughter, both changed by the journey we'd traveled. The $40 million that had briefly torn us apart now seemed like a strange dream, less real than the simple bookstore around us, or the hard-won wisdom we now shared. What's your story of a relationship tested by money or success? Have you ever had to forgive someone who chose wealth or status over loyalty? Or have you been the one who needed forgiveness? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if this story touched you in any way, please subscribe to hear more of my journey and share with someone who might need this message today. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, true wealth isn't in your bank account, but in the hearts of those who love you without conditions.